Collin Sexton, young bull, one of the league's budding stars, is not on an NBA roster. This man averaged 24 points per game during the 2021 season, and somehow we're 1 month into NBA free agency, and this dude has not been signed anywhere.
Cobra.
Alright, let's go back a little bit. Collin had a breakout season in 2021 where he averaged 24 points per game, 4.5 assists, and 37% from 3, and looked to be one of the franchise cornerstones for the Cavs going forward. However, 2022 was not kind to Sexton, as he only played 7 games before he tore his meniscus and ended his season. In these 7 games, he saw drops in his production as he only averaged 16 points and he only shot 25% from 3. But with this being a very small sample size, the main concern for Sexton wasn't his lower production, but his injury, and more importantly, the emergence of Darius Garland in his absence. As the primary ball handler now, Garland saw increases in his production as he averaged 21 points per game, almost 9 assists per game, and he shot 39% from 3. And overall, he just looked like a better floor general compared to Collin Sexton. And this summer, they agreed to a max contract extension with him. The Cavs had found their new franchise point guard. To go along with this, Evan Mobley had one of the best seasons of any rookie last year. And when you combine his extension with Jared Allen's $20 million a year contract and Karis LeVert's $18 million a year contract, things are getting pretty expensive for the Cavs. This offseason, Collin's been looking for a contract between $15 million and $20 million a year, but probably closer to $20 million a year. And this just doesn't really fit what the Cavs have going on. Right now, they're pretty close to the luxury tax, and if they were to give Collin the deal that he's looking for, it would definitely put them over that mark. And because of this, it's being reported that they've only offered him a 3-year, $40 million contract, which is well below what a player of his caliber should be getting, even coming off injury. At this point, it just feels like the Cavs just aren't fully committed to bringing him back, especially with them having found their franchise point guard in Garland last season, so Sexton will probably have to look elsewhere to get the contract that he's really looking for. But there's a couple big obstacles that he's going to have to overcome in order to get this contract. First of all, he's a restricted free agent, so any offer that a team gives him, the Cavs will have the ability to match. Second, there's not very many teams with salary cap space left. The only 2 teams that would be able to really give him the contract that he wants are the Spurs and the Pacers. The Spurs don't seem very likely, given that they just traded away a young point guard in DeJounte Murray this offseason, and they're probably going to be tanking the next couple of years. So Sexton just doesn't really fit that timeline. The other team's the Pacers, and this could actually be a fit. Right now, they have $29 million in cap space, which should be more than enough to get Collin. And with them having traded Malcolm Brogdon to the Celtics this offseason, they now have an opening at point guard that Sexton could come in and fill. However, there's 2 issues here that I see. First of all, I'm not really sure that the Pacers are that interested in Sexton because I feel like he would have already gotten a contract offer from them by now. They already missed out on DeAndre Ayton earlier in the offseason, so I just think that they would have already tried to pivot to Sexton. Like, there's not really anything that's holding them back from throwing a contract at him right now. The second reason I don't think Sexton to the Pacers would be that likely is because he's a restricted free agent. The Cavs have the ability to match any offer he gets, and I just don't think that they would just let him walk for nothing and go to a division rival. However, it's still a possibility that he ends up there just because they have the most salary cap space and they're the only team that can give him a contract without having to give up any assets or make any additional moves around it to make it happen. But if he doesn't end up on the Pacers, then he's going to have to go somewhere through a sign and trade. One team that I could see try to make a move for Sexton is the Utah Jazz, but this will ultimately depend on the direction that they try to move as a franchise. Obviously, if they trade Donovan Mitchell, then they're just going to go into full rebuild mode, and Sexton probably doesn't fit their timeline there. But in the event that they do try to retool around Donovan Mitchell, I think Sexton could be a decent fit, as long as Mitchell's fine playing with another primary ball handler next to him. It wouldn't be the best fit in the world, but with what's currently available to them to try to improve this team, it could be a fit. For the Jazz to get Sexton, they would have to do a sign trade with the Cavs, and this would probably have to include Malik Beasley or Bogdanovich going to the Cavs. Additionally, they probably have to work a 3rd team in this trade because I'm not sure that the Jazz are going to want to have Mike Conley and Collin Sexton and Donovan Mitchell all on the same team. That's a lot of primary ball handlers, and I think that backcourt would be a little overloaded. But in order to do that, they would have to give up additional assets, and for a team that probably still won't be doing very much, the Jazz might just be thinking that they just want to move Mitchell instead and just go full rebuild. Another destination that Collin Sexton could end up at is the Dallas Mavericks. Having lost Jalen Brunson, who was a key scorer and contributor for the Mavs last season, Sexton could slide into his role very perfectly. Earlier this offseason, there was even a report that the loser between the Knicks and the Mavs in the Jalen Brunson sweepstakes, if you want to call it that, would go after Collin Sexton as a backup plan. And I think this could be a really good fit for the Mavs. Sexton filling in that Jalen Brunson role, he can just be a pure scorer and the secondary ball handler to Luka, which Jalen Brunson was. But while the fit is great, in order to make this trade work, they'd have to move Tim Hardaway Jr., who's coming off injury from last year. And with him getting $18 million per year over the next 3 years, the Cavs wouldn't want him if they don't want Collin Sexton. I mean, Sexton is objectively a better player than Tim Hardaway Jr. So this sign and trade would also have to facilitate a third team. In this case, the Mavs would probably have to send Hardaway to the Spurs, which would take a first-round draft pick. And then to get the Cavs to actually do the deal, they'd probably have to send another first to them and maybe another young player. So they'd be giving up a lot of assets just to make this work. And personally, I just think it might be too much. Another team that I could see Sexton going to is the Los Angeles Lakers. They obviously need to get better. This offseason, they've gotten younger, and Sexton would certainly add on to this. Outside of the 7 games he played last season, he's been a solid shooter, which naturally always fits well with LeBron James. Last offseason, we saw Malik Monk go to the Lakers and try to prove himself, and I think Sexton could try to do this himself. But like the other destinations, there's a couple obstacles that are preventing Sexton from going to the Lakers. First of all, Russell Westbrook. How would he play next to Westbrook? I'm not really too sure. I mean, Malik Monk was pretty good next to the Lakers' big 3 last season, so maybe there is enough room for Collin Sexton. The Lakers have seen this offseason that it's very hard to move Russell Westbrook, and so I don't expect him to be moved in a sign and trade for Sexton. Instead, what I see the Lakers doing is sending THT, Kendrick Nunn, and either Stanley Johnson or Wenyen Gabriel to the Cavs, along with a first-round pick. The Lakers have been hesitant to move their picks this offseason, but I think that they would have to move it in order to get the Cavs to say yes to this deal. But I think if you're adding a player who's only 23 years old and has potential to be a star like Collin Sexton, that it's definitely worth it, and you have to make that move if the Cavs are willing to accept it. And in return, signing Sexton to either a $19 million a year contract or a $20 million a year contract, depending on if they send Johnson or Gabriel. If I'm the Lakers, I'd rather send Wenyen Gabriel. I think Stanley Johnson fits a lot better on the Lakers right now, and I think he's just overall a better player. But if they do keep Stanley Johnson, then they're not going to be able to give Collin Sexton the full $20 million that he might be seeking. But at this point, his market is pretty dead, so I'm sure he'd be willing to take 19.3 or 19.4 million, whatever the exact number is, especially if he's only taking a 1-year deal. But is this what LeBron wants? It's no secret that he wants to reunite with Kyrie, whether it's this offseason or next. Making this move for Sexton would take away the assets that they would need to acquire Kyrie this offseason, and it would take away the salary cap space that they could use to acquire him next offseason. There is the possibility that Sexton would take just a 1-year deal and try to prove himself and get a bigger contract next season. Ultimately, if the Lakers are willing to give up a first-round pick and they're willing to give up the ability of getting Kyrie, then I think this is one of the easier destinations it is for Collin Sexton to get the contract that he's looking for. But the easiest and most likely option next season is that he just re-signs the Cavs. In the end, I think there's just too much in the way of him going to another team. He's a restricted free agent, and the Cavs have to say yes to any potential sign-in trades, so he just doesn't really have much negotiating room here. If the Pacers are really interested, he could try to negotiate a deal with them, or if the Cavs are willing to agree to some of the sign-in trade packages I mentioned, then we could see him in a different uniform next season. But instead of taking a 3-year $40 million offer that they gave him, or trying to negotiate the 4-year $80 million deal, which the Cavs just don't really seem to want to do, he's probably gonna have to bet on himself and just take a 1-year deal with the Cavs. Right now, the Cavs are around $13 million under the luxury tax threshold, so I could see him taking this $13 million and trying to prove himself to the league and get the big contract that he's looking for. We've seen plenty of other players try to bet on themselves, and while it is risky, I think this could play out very well for Sexton, and in the end, allow him to get the contract that he definitely is worth.